These frontier lab companies have billions of dollars to spend on marketing. They want you to feel fear. You're behind, you're going to lose your job. Everyone else is doing it. You're not doing it. Combine that with influencers who are, again, optimized to sort of create wow fear selling of look at all the amazing things I can do. Can you do this? They're paying to do it and they're incentivized to do it. The feed is not a reflection of the reality. You're not behind, but you need to start where you are. You cannot freeze. That's the worst thing to do.
Hello and welcome to One Night in Product, the show where I chat to some of the brightest minds in and around product from across the globe to help you see product management in a whole new light. If that sounds up your street, don't forget to dive into the back catalogue on your favourite podcast app or on YouTube, and of course, follow, share, or drop me a comment or review. It all helps keep the lights on. On this episode, I'm speaking to Barry O'Reilly. Barry's an entrepreneur, executive advisor, and author who works with senior leaders to redesign how their organisations perform, hopefully for the better. Barry has a long, storied career, including leading transformation efforts for up-and-coming companies like British Airways, Barclays, and The Economist, as well as almost working with Elon Musk back in the day. A lucky escape there, some might say, and also the best-selling author of Lean Enterprise and Unlearn. Now Barry's got the AI bug and is back with a new book, Artificial Organisations, that says that AI isn't replacing leaders, it's exposing them. Well, let's hope it's at least got the decency to put some little black bars over their sensitive parts. Barry, thanks for coming, and welcome to the show.
Listen, I have been dying to do this show for a long time, so I am very happy to be here.
Well, look, it's good to have you here. We're going to get through this together. We're going to uncover everything about AI. We're going to learn and unlearn and all these other things that we do along the way. And we're going to come out better people and better leaders, I'm sure. But let's talk about you to start with. It's been a bit since Unlearn came out a few years back, obviously Lean Enterprise as well. You're out there in Asia now doing all of the things. And just kind of curious, for people that maybe don't know you or aren't up to date with what you're working on, what are you working on these days and kind of what's keeping you busy?
Yeah, thanks. So I think a little bit around after Unlearn came out in 2021, I started an early stage AI incubator called Nobody Studios. With our goal was to try and build 100 companies over the next 5 years. So I've literally been spending my time figuring out, how to use these new technologies to build companies cheaper, faster, better. And really, I guess artificial organizations is sort of the lessons learned from that. When we first started the studio, I think some of these tools really, they were nowhere near what they are today. I think the ChatGPT moment that most people experienced in 23 really even shifted how we pivoted the whole studio. Like simple things, even our financial models, we were expecting our startup teams to have anywhere between 6 or 10 people as they were scaling. And we were investing $250,000 over 12 months to sort of incubate these companies and get them going. But today, our teams are a fraction of the size. We model around 4 to 6 people. Someone who can sell, someone who can build, someone who can support customers and go to market. And then you load around where you have opportunity to go faster. So fundamentally, so many things that I was even thinking about 4 or 5 years ago have shifted. But the most important ones is probably how I work. And a lot of that has been inspired from leveraging these tools, not to do my job, but to support me in how I work. And that's really what the book and is sort of inspiration for it is about.
But would you say that you're now like 100x Barry O'Reilly, or are you sort of somewhere in between 0 and 100x or 1 and 100x at the moment?
Yeah, 100x is, well,
because that's the cliche, right? Everyone's talking about how they're 100xing everything. I just wondered how many X's you've got to so far. You've obviously thrown yourself into it. You've obviously, presumably made a few mistakes along the way as you've been kind of learning some of this stuff. And then you've kind of come back and sort of told us or written a book to tell us all about where you're at now and some of the things you've learned. But I just wondered, because, I'm being slightly cheeky with the 100x thing, but at the same time, could you even put a number on a percentage number or an X number on what you think the impact on what you've been doing? Like you talked about how you work. How many X's do you think you've gone up in that, with the stuff that you've learned?
No, it's a great question. So the way I think about it is I used to sort of have a ratio of what percentage of my time was spent on doing like necessary administrative work, like filling out the Jira tickets and following up on the, did it get done or not, right? Versus how much of my time was creative problem solving on the really the knotty, difficult problems. And when I ask most people that, they always say they've an 80-20 split. They've about 20% of their time is on the problem solving and 80% is admin. And especially as you're an exec, it's even worse. You feel like you're just going from meeting to meeting to admin, this stack of stuff filling up behind you. So, but how I tend to think about it now is I have managed to reduce that admin work like massively. I would say maybe 2 orders of magnitude. So I sort of feel like I'm sitting now in this sort of 60% creative problem solving, 40% necessary admin, which is like, to your point, it's 200% increase in that capacity of problem solving. But I think the thing that's really, really important that your influencers that are building 7,000 agents on the weekend and making $10,000 a month with affiliate marketing deals don't talk about is that capacity is not necessarily activity. It's actually time where I'm thinking, like going for a walk and deeply considering a problem. It's time where I'm like creating things and prototyping them and testing them, which I just didn't have before. Right? I was on the treadmill like everybody else, and I think that has really surprised me. Where I'm like, actually, I've got time now to think, and that, which I believe, is helping me make better decisions. I'm showing up better. And we'll talk a little bit more about how presence I think is so important now in leadership. But that's how I think about it. I'm not. I know you're tongue in cheek with your 100x, but I feel more present as a leader, and that actually and present both at work and present at home, and that's a gift in my world anyway.
No, absolutely. And yeah, we'll absolutely talk about some of those topics as well. But, those topics are you kind of enunciated in the book that you've kind of already alluded to. We talked about the introduction of artificial organizations. So you kind of said already that was almost kind of like that almost was the output of all the things that you'd learned along the way. And you felt, I guess, the need to get that out. You've obviously written books before. You know how much of an undertaking it can be to write a book, but you wanted to write another one anyway. Was that something that kind of almost inevitably had to come out of the learning journey that you'd gone on, or was there like another kind of almost kind of starting point or like a tipping point that made you think that was a good idea to get that book out there?
So the most people don't know this, but I'm dyslexic. I have a solid history of D-minuses in English literature. If my teacher knew that I'd written 3 books, they wouldn't believe you, and actually Unlearn, funnily enough, was one of the breakthrough moments for me when I first started to understand how I could use technology to support how I work. So I had this view, right, of writers that they're like, sitting by a roaring fire with a purple velvet jacket on, drinking wine, just like, chugging it down and tearing pages off. And so, I sat by fires, I drank a lot of wine, but I wasn't writing very much. But the sort of aha for me was this is sort of like the archetype, right? Like that archetype was what I thought a writer did, or how you made a book.
Yeah.
But the reframe I really had was, well, hang on a sec. How do I do my best work? Like typing is difficult for me. Like I'm trying to type a word and then I figure out how do you spell thought or through, or how is it, like I get stuck. So my natural trait for doing a lot of innovative work is actually talking. I like talking out ideas. Like I love podcasts, like back and forth, debating things. It's a really energizing way for me to ideate. And then the task of writing a book, it's not typing, it's creating content. And there's so many ways to create content. So as soon as I was like, all right, talking is my natural trait, the task is creating content, So if I just have a tool that can help me, I capture, and if you transcribe me talking, then I could be way more efficient. So I ended up hiring a journalist, and the journalist would interview me. We'd bullet point out the chapters, and they would interview me, and we would talk for like 40 minutes. And I would get like 10,000 words, and they would take the recording and send it to an AI transcription service and get it back in like a few minutes. And then they would copy edit the chapter and almost send me in like an MVP chapter within an hour and a half. So I would go from creation to sort of iteration in about 2 hours. And I'd be like, oh, I forgot that story. And this actually I wouldn't say it like this. And so I was moving so quickly. It almost felt like I was cheating. Um, and it was this was the whole idea of where I sort of had the aha moment. It's like, actually, we've got this wrong. Like I've spent so much of my time trying to shoehorn myself into a way that I thought work should be done. But if I redesign this approach and leverage my natural traits, my natural abilities, and understand the task I'm focused on and have a tool there to support me, like that iteration I was just accelerating so fast. And to the point earlier, the admin work started going away. All of that work was like creative problem solving, right? Thinking of the ideas, iterating and tweaking the chapters, right? The admin of typing it all up or getting the idea, like that was just being reduced. So that's sort of, how I first sort of had this aha moment, was like, right, well, what else can I use this for? And that was my launch point.
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually was going to make a cheeky point about the fact that the very first page of the book had like EM dashes in, which is obviously what people start to talk about. Oh, yeah, that's been written by AI in the first place. It would feel almost bullying to sort of go down that line now. But it is an interesting point, this idea of like the mechanical stuff. The mechanical aspects of, writing and, drafting and redrafting and, spell checking and editing and all of that stuff. Like, it's all important. It's something that people have been doing for years, when, for time immemorial, since they've been making books. And it does feel then, on the one hand, you could sit there and say, from a purist perspective, well, that's part of the craft, right? Like, you need to do that stuff. If you don't do that stuff, like in the age old fashion, then somehow you're not doing the job. But it does open up a whole new fascinating idea that who cares? Like, who cares how that bit was done, as long as it was done in some way and as long as the output is good? Because then, and I know we want to talk a little bit about AI slop later, but there's this kind of almost debate on, with like social media and marketing copy and such around like, well, yeah, you can tell it's AI and you can tell that they've, just like kind of crapped it out. And obviously that's not what you're talking about, but there's this almost a pushback against if it looks a bit too AI or if it looks like it's too assisted. But again, first of all, with dyslexia, assistance is a good thing, right? But also at the same time, typing was never the job, right? So I guess then that almost naturally leads into this idea of with the book about that is also true about leadership and probably a lot about other jobs. So kind of feels like that journey almost then set the scene for the book and maybe some of the stuff that you're doing these days. Is that fair enough?
Absolutely, right? Because for me, I always see the tools as a support mechanism to help me do my best work. And if I can recognize how I do my best work, then I can really focus on that. And then the tools can be there to support me. So to
Yeah.
your point, the logical progression for me after using a transcription service, like when I was trying to write the book, the next step was, where else are the moments where I create the most amount of value? And for me, again, it was meetings, right? I was often in meetings with founders in the studio, meetings with execs where I'm coaching. And like anyone, I'd be in a meeting and they'd be talking to me and I'm scribbling down notes and I'm thinking about the meeting from the last one and I'm thinking about what I got to have for lunch and I'm thinking all this stuff in my head, right? So again, I started using a meeting co-pilot in literally 2016. And everywhere I went in meetings, that meeting co-pilot was with me. So I started capturing every conversation and started turning it into a data asset. Every coaching call, every person I spoke to. And the way it showed up is I would show up in those meetings actually with an empty head. I wouldn't be worried about what was the last meeting, what were the actions, because I knew I had an audit log of that behind me. So when I came to meet the next person, I could be again present for them. And I didn't have this cognitive tax that was in my head all the time. So I could show up. And again, this is especially for product leaders, being in a calm state when you're dealing with complexity, uncertainty, high stakes decisions. That's the state you want to be in when you have to make tough choices, not hamster wheeled, running from one thing to the next, 50
Yep.
things in your head. So again, but people noticed that because after I had meetings with them, I would literally take my transcription, synthesize it in an LLM and send out the thanks for the chat, Jason. Here's the key actions we talked about, the themes. We're meeting here. This is what you got. This is what I got. And people were sort of shocked. They were like, how did you do that? Because
Yep.
I felt so listened to in the meeting, and then even before I would meet them, like 24 hours before, I'd send them the nudge going, right, here's the actions. Here's all I need to make this decision. Another thing, like meeting agendas. Now, fair play to you. When you run your podcast, you set up an agenda. 90% of people don't do that for meetings. They don't do it for shows. They don't do it for anything. And again, it sets an expectation when you're meeting with someone and they're like, here's the decisions I want to make. Here's the supporting information to make those decisions. So when you meet, it's not rebuilding context to go, what did we talk about last week? I forgot where has anyone got Jira open? What's the ticket number? It's literally like high velocity decision making. And I like working like that. And I think a lot of people like that feeling of making decisions, of time well spent. So that's again how this all started compounding to me. And now here we are 10 years later, and I have this amazing database of every conversation I've ever had with execs that I've been coaching, with teams that I've been working with. So I can actually give myself feedback on how I run those meetings, on how I show up, on patterns and how they evolve over time, because I'm just mining all these conversations that I've had. And that feeds everything I do, from social media posts to blog posts to books to, it's a living context. And that for me, I suppose, is the fun part of all of this, and how it supports me, because I still have to do the creative acts,
Yep.
but the information is there to support my instinct.
I was going to say this idea of like having an eternal database of all your conversations almost starts to sound like it could be like compromat or materials that you could go back and bully people with afterwards. But I'm sure that you're far too ethical to do that kind of thing. But all right, we kind of gone around the edge a fair bit now about like what this book's about. But you've got to get your best salesman pitch voice on right now and just maybe talk a little bit about the core premise, value proposition of the book, and ultimately who should be buying that book, who should be picking that book up, and what they're going to learn from it.
Yeah. So the core premise is that this book has nothing to do with tools. And AI tools are the absolute worst place to start any sort of journey. This book is all about better judgment, decision making, and how you operate as a leader. The tools are the periphery to that. So even in the examples we shared, everything I start with is around you understanding yourself, about how you do your best work and how you make decisions. Because for me, the most important thing and a capability that we can very easily lose is our ability to make decisions if we lean too heavily on technology. The moment you start deferring agency and using these machines to tell you answers rather than to pressure test your thinking, you're already on a road to perdition, I would say. So for me, again, the last thing that is uniquely human is judgment, is our ability as product leaders, as any leader, to look at the information and make a decision. Machines suck at that, but machines are great at capturing information, at synthesizing information, at actually allowing you to sort of play with the information at huge volumes that you as a human, you just can't comprehend. But you need to hold on to the judgment and the decision making. And for me, that's really the core tenet of this book. So the joke of AI isn't replacing leaders, it's exposing them. Really, what I'm saying is it's exposing your leadership systems, your decision making systems. And if you don't have any, you're going to struggle. But if you can build that competency, you can really refine it and get better and really outperform most people in the market in ways you're probably going to surprise yourself. And for me, that's the personal growth aspect for all of this.
So when you say leader, I mean, obviously you could sit there and think of a CEO, you could sit there and think like a company founder. You've mentioned already product leaders as well. Are we talking basically about anyone that leads organizations or people that lead teams or all of the above, additional to the above? Like, how are you defining a leader in this context?
Yeah,
Because
like,
some people, for example, would say, for example, that any product manager is a leader. I don't think that's always
yeah, for sure.
100% true in all organizations, but like, yeah, how is leader being defined in this context?
Yeah, for me, I would think about it anybody who's responsible for making any decisions of any consequence. And then obviously the magnitudes of those decisions are higher order, right? As a CEO versus an IC on their first day and they're building a better landing page for a new product,
Yep.
right? Like there's different magnitudes there. But at the end of the day, the crux of everyone's job and what we're generally paid for is to make decisions or to make recommendations about what a decision should be, even if you're an IC. So for me, that's really the place I begin from. And then asking people to start recognizing how they do their best work, where are the places that they create value, and then identifying potentially tools that can help them accelerate that process or improve it. And for me, that's, as you say, it's anyone who's making decisions. So a leader can be at any level. But again, the book is packed primarily because I work with execs, primarily Fortune 500 execs. It's packed with examples from Stephen Franchetti, who's the CIO of Slack, Andrew Phillips, the CTO of Skyscanner. We have execs from HSBC, Progeny, the world's largest provider of fertility benefits. Like all of these are people I've been working and coaching with over the last number of years to help them improve how they run these, multi-million dollar, billion-dollar companies. And it's fascinating to see how these folks dive into this to improve because they're interested in personal growth, right? They're interested in making better decisions and running better businesses. And yeah, lots of fun examples I can share of all, and even building our studio of all the crazy mistakes we made along the way that, is always interesting to help people avoid them.
Well, that's the thing, you kind of come back with all the arrows sticking out your back and, telling people how to dodge the arrows, right? So it's always that kind of school of hard knocks type of thing going on as well. But leadership in itself is an interesting concept, right? Because if you look at some of the AI commentary out there these days, there's this whole thing around like, leadership is dead. We don't need leadership anymore. Like everyone can just be a super individual contributor and etc. And people should be building their own stuff again. On the other hand, you can sit there and say, to your point just now that, there's leadership is almost defined by the consequentiality of the decisions that people make and the kind of the impact that they can have. So how are you seeing, whether it's using AI or not, how are you seeing the role or the importance of good leadership these days? Because not everyone seems to believe in it anymore. I still do. I wonder where you were on the kind of the idea that like leadership is like a dying art somehow or should be dying versus actually it just needs to get really better.
Yeah, I think the best leaders I've worked with, certainly over the last number of years, if anything, have more humanity to them than ever before. A good example again is Pete Avanieski, who's the CEO of Progeny. Now, Progeny, as I said, are the largest provider of fertility benefits in the US. They're a NASDAQ listed company. Prior to starting Progeny, Pete was the CFO of WebMD, which is like he was there for 14 years, built up that company. He's super meticulous. He's data driven, more like absolutely down into the minutiae of everything. And for years, the way he had managed all of his work was on a Word doc. He literally just had a Word document of like meeting with Jason, meeting with Barry. This is what we talked about. Like that's how he managed these massive companies. So the thought of using these tools or changing the way he worked, most people were scared because he's a CFO background that he just wanted to see, show me the measurable ROI. That person isn't contributing. Let's eradicate them. But he did some very unique things that I think really showed leadership for me. The first thing he did is he talked about this idea in the company that they're going to use these tools to elevate, not eliminate people. They're going to use them as a way to sort of help them do the best work of their lives. The first person to start sharing in the open about what they were trying to do, what worked, what didn't work, was him. He put his hand up to say, I'm going to start using these tools on a daily basis, and I'm going to share with you every week what I tried, what I liked, what I found difficult. And imagine, this is a person for their whole life, they've just had a Word doc to manage their whole business. So as we started running experiments together, getting him having co-pilots in meetings, getting him use them to generate his notes, generate strategy documents, look at different scenarios, get hold of data that he would had ideas around potential sales opportunities and playing around in an LLM to run multiple scenario plans and variables. Like this guy was in heaven. But what he was doing was showing his team every week, I tried this, it didn't work. I tried this, here's how I'm going to do it differently next week. So it wasn't just a statement of, we all need to suddenly be amazing at this, and I just bought you licenses for the product. If you're not amazing, you're fired. He really was talked about it, and then he walked the walk about it. And for me, that's where then you have this explosion of experimentation in the companies, because people say, right, if the leaders are doing this, I should need to do this. I'm gonna mimic their behavior, right? And Progeny had just an amazing exec team. Like their chief HR officer, you're gonna love this. So she was adamant she wanted to build this sort of HR product where it would onboard new people into the company. And so when people came in, they would have a ChatGPT-esque interface that they could just have dialogues. Like, what are the public holidays? How many days off do I get? What options do I have for healthcare services? So what was really fascinating about building that is that instantly she started to learn the questions people had about HR. She had like an objective reference of these are the policy questions people are asking about. So what she could do is like self-serve the really low-level, simple, when's the next public holiday question. But she could set boundaries around if there was questions that were anyway unclear or had some sort of real personal impact, that would go straight to her team. So the ticket queue on her response times went down from literally 3 days to less than 16 hours. They had a learning mechanism about the questions people kept asking. They used that to adapt their healthcare policies inside the company and change their whole benefits offering internally in the company. So she had built this whole product that was basically a living, breathing HR system adapting to customer requests and needs. So to me, that's where you get people who, and then an intern built this, by the way. This wasn't like a big 10 million, get me a software squad that I need 25 people to build this thing. This is like an intern doing it over a summer. And one of the best things is we were doing one of the calls and this new lady had just joined the company and she's like, yeah, the last 3 days I've just been talking to the HR bot and I never have felt better onboarded in my life of in a company. I know who to talk to, who makes decisions, what meetings I need to attend. And to me, like that was a powerful example of a leader, like from the CEO right down with the exec teams, like demonstrating the leadership in this space. And for me, that's how these companies are going to be successful. You can't outsource it. It's not like digital transformation where you just put everything in the cloud and you tick box it and you're done. You have to change the behavior and you got to role model it.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting point with regards to, for example, the intern doing it, and obviously people kind of throwing their kind of weight behind it and experimenting and seeing what works and what doesn't work. Because one of the things you talked about in your book was, I think you did like a survey with your mailing list of CEOs and leaders around all of your subscriber base. And I think it showed something like 61% of senior leaders still consider themselves somewhat beginners when it comes to using AI in the first place. But then when I look on social media and LinkedIn and even, God forbid, X, these days it seems like everyone's at it and everyone's doing all of this stuff already. So based on your experience, do you think that kind of AI adoption in the real world amongst real leaders is actually quite a lot earlier than the kind of the social media narrative would say? Or like, are we kind of just in a bubble of some sorts? Because the two stories don't seem to join up.
They don't, right? And to me, it's a byproduct of two things. One, these frontier lab companies have billions of dollars to spend on marketing. So they want you to feel fear. That's how they're selling. They're selling through fear. You're behind, you're going to lose your job. Everyone else is doing it. You're not doing it. And then also you combine that with influencers who are, again, optimized to sort of create wow, again, fear selling of look at all the amazing things I can do. Can you do this? Right. And then you have, so that is just, and they are the two bodies or entities that control most of your marketing social media feeds, right? Like that they're paying to do it and they're incentivized to do it. But when you actually talk to the people on the ground, if you talk to so I keynoted Gartner's CFO conference in Washington 3 months ago, and every single one of the CFOs in there was sitting there going, I have no idea the return on investment for the spend I'm making. I have a line that shows my spend on licenses for Microsoft Copilot going like this. And I have a usage line that is less than 1% relative to that spend. What's going on? Right. So, and so companies are still very scared to turn this technology on because you have to remember, like a Microsoft license for some of these engineers is like $1,000 a month. And if you're a medium-sized company of 1,000 people, like that's $1 million line item you have a month that you haven't even thought about adding to your capacity, right? So these are decisions that companies have to take their time on, and it's rightly so. So I would say that the feed is not a reflection of the reality, and you're not behind, but you need to start where you are. You cannot freeze. That's the worst thing to do. You have to start taking small steps. Like, what's a decision you could maybe experiment with? What's a workflow you could try and automate? Sitting on the sidelines is not an option here, because the people who are experimenting are, again, learning at a higher velocity, and they will just accelerate. So you have to start, but you're not as far behind as your social media feed wants to tell you are.
But it's interesting though, because whilst I agree that people should start working out what's in it for them and what they can do, this narrative of like, well, either you're behind or you're not behind and you should start, or you got to catch up, or you'd be left too far behind in the future, etc. I kind of understand where that comes from. And obviously at least some of it comes from people trying to sell courses and tools and stuff. But in theory, and this is an ill-formed kind of birthing thought that I'm just coming up with as I say it, but just this idea of like, are they behind? Because surely what's going to happen is that people and tool makers and AI aficionados and such, they're going to make a bunch of mistakes and going to come up with something that works that you can then just use. Now, I want to talk a little bit in a minute about some of the ways that you make this stuff yours versus just generic, but on a kind of purely tooling perspective, it kind of feels like being an early adopter in such a fast moving space could actually, it's just gonna be fun. But like, whether actually kind of some people are going to be just fine whenever they come on, whenever they come on board.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and I can even bring that to life for people. Um, Even in the last month, so we're recording this at the beginning of August, right? Um, 3 or 4 weeks ago, if you were using a tool like ChatGPT and you wanted to try and integrate it into various different components of your work, plug in your Gmail, plug in your calendar, plug in your work management tool, whatever, you had to use a codex, which is one of their packages. And it was also really difficult to make that work, right? It was a pain. It was basically a pain. You almost had to be at the level of like some engineering capability or willing to learn it. So again, roll back 3 weeks ago, and they make um, GBT work available, where suddenly you can have a dialogue, like a human dialogue, with your machine, and say, plug in my chat, plug in my Gmail, and then start looking through that. And this is what I always do every morning: look over the last 36 hours of my work and bring up all the actions potentially I have to do from my email, my Slack, my calendar, my right. And I get that every morning when I wake up. Like, to do that, even 6 months ago, would require some level of programming capability. Today, I just wake up and I say it to the machine, and now it can do it. Right. So I can get this, as you say, like really like rich experience out of the box now that I couldn't get. So if my day one of playing with these tools was last week, I'm literally like, this is Pandora's box now, right? You're literally like going, oh my God, this thing's amazing, right? So um, the principle of what you're saying is true. I think though the moment has to be the start where you are, right? Like, again, there's a risk of opportunity cost, if you want to call it that, of not taking action. Because the only way you can learn this stuff is you cannot learn it in a book. You cannot learn it in a
Oh, don't
course.
say that, Barry. You've just written a book about it.
Don't worry, I'm happy to tell people that you only can do it by actually using it, right? Because again, it's such a personal thing. Again, this is why I go back to the human side of this. Like, the way I use these tools is going to be fundamentally different about how you use them, because we've different styles probably of ways of working. We've different tasks that create value for us. So again, to me, it's just like you now have this, again, like, I call like almost AI like a thinking partner to work with you, right? So for me, it's a joy because I come up with ideas and then I tell these machines to like tell me everything that's wrong with it. Tell me all the assumptions I'm making. Tell me the blind spots. Give me 4 different scenarios for this idea that if the price of oil goes from $100 a barrel to $200 a barrel, what would that mean? Or, that's amazing in airline industry where you're like razor thin and so I can do like quantitative modeling now on hunches, where when I then go to talk to partners or peers or people I'm working with, I don't come to them with these sort of 101 questions like, hey, why does the price of oil matter in the airline industry? I can go to them and I'm like saying, okay, I've been looking at these. I had this hunch. Here's all the information I looked at. Here's the scenarios I ran. These are some of the assumptions I'm making. And the 3 options that were there, I'm going with this option 2 because I think it's the right one for these reasons. You're an expert in that field. But what am I missing here? Like, what a great conversation. Like that's how I dream people would use my time if it was in the other side, right? And so I think if you think of it like this, that it's not there to take away, to give you the answers, that it's there to pressure test, to raise the bar, to allow you to do more of the hard work yourself, you can get so much out of this experience right now.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously some of the stuff that you talk about in the book is around what you might kind of call classic LLM use cases, right? You mentioned it earlier. Bring something to the meeting and it can kind of transcribe your meeting, it can summarize your meeting, it give you actions off your meeting, you can get a summary for next time off your meeting. Now, that's not necessarily the most controversial use case for this stuff. Like a lot of people are using it for that, and obviously there are entire apps built around it. And any meeting you go on is going to have 15 different note takers on it these days as well. Plus, plus everyone's like private granolas that you can't see. But it's the kind of thing that you imagine quite a lot of people are doing. But you talk in the book, you just talked about it just then, and something I'm let's just say I'm passionate about it, but it's definitely like a use case that I'm very keen to push with people. Is this exactly as you say, kind of almost as a thought partner? So the way I've kind of tried to experiment this stuff is almost as like virtual stakeholders that I can kind of go and take my things to, or not necessarily my things, but like people that I'm working with, get them to take their things to it. Because as you say, they're going to miss a bunch of potentially obvious things. And it's almost like there's this credibility that they can get because they can sit there and not have to ask the dumb questions in the room, but they can already have asked the dumb questions and got some basic, it's not going to make an expert in that area, but at least they're not going to kind of make the person that they're speaking to kind of low-key angry that they're having to answer these dumb questions in a meeting when you want to talk about some other stuff instead. And then it reminds me of past experiences where you've had people going into meetings, maybe they're doing that big presentation and the meeting goes completely off the rails because, on slide 2, there's an assumption that wasn't right, or a kind of a point that they made that didn't really answer the question that was obviously going to be asked by the person that was in the room. So, then rather than spending a productive hour actually doing something and coming to a proper decision, you're just spending an hour arguing the toss over something that probably could have been answered in a couple of minutes. Do you think this is kind of the most high-powered sort of use case of all of this stuff? Is there something that's better than that? Because for me, that really is part of the magic, especially for product managers as they're trying to up themselves, product leaders as they're trying to advocate for themselves at the top table. This to me sounds like the big unlock.
Yeah, and like you say, it's a progression for many people to get there, right? Like the table stakes, as you described it, is just understanding that every conversation can be captured as data, and you can use that data to show up better, to prepare better, right? And that's for me, that's like, that's the entree. The main course, as you're describing,
Wait.
right?
Is this the American entree or the European entree? Because I'm still salty about that, to be honest.
That's okay. It's your show, so we'll say it's the first meal served. But
Good. That makes
but
sense.
then, as you say, like where it starts to get interesting, as you're describing, is this idea of like pressure testing, right? So one of the things we built, as I said, one-on-ones with Pete Evanessi, the CEO of Progeny, right? Like super detail-oriented guy, always in the numbers, ex-CFO, like, and he's time poor, right? So his exec team, but if they're lucky, they've 45 minutes a week to do their one-on-one to get a decision on a couple of things and update them. And the example that you described there is something that could happen in those meetings. So what we did, and this wasn't to make fun of Pete, but what we did is we programmed an executive GBT that people could sort of prepare to go and meet him, that would exhibit like questions he would ask, but like disconfirming questions, checking assumptions. So people would show up better. It's as simple as that. And everyone has a better experience of those, time poor, high stakes moments, whether it's a presentation, whether it's a one-on-one with the CEO, so the quality of that moment is higher. It's better for everybody. And people feel more confident showing up, and they get a better outcome at the end. And then again, like you say, the last piece for me, which is a dessert, which I think we can all agree is the final.
The last bit. Before the cheese, maybe.
Exactly, yeah. But is this idea of presence? Is because when you feel prepared, when you feel like you've done the work, where you show up in a different way. You show up confident, ready to be listening, to look for gaps in your thinking. And again, what a great place to be, and that's where you make your best decisions. Plus, at the end of the day, you can close your laptop and you can go home. You can sit down for dinner with your family and you're not thinking about 5 emails that you have to send. You're present in those moments too as well. And for me, that's how this starts to give us a whole better work experience and life experience overall. Is that if you have these support mechanisms around you to help you do your best work, to be the best person you can in these high stakes moments, it permeates your life. And for me, that's been the biggest gift of all of this stuff, is that I'm happier as a person. I'm less stressed. I've got systems now that support me, that I don't have to remember every conversation that I've had, every detail, every action, when it needs to be done. I've all this support mechanism around me. I've got a high stakes podcast that I'm doing with you. I can pressure test my questions and but
Oh, don't worry. This is the lowest stakes one you can worry about. It's not a problem.
but you're smiling because you know this, right? And you're doing it, and you're reaping the benefits, and you're coaching people how to do it, and that for me makes work better for all of us. And so I that's what makes me most excited about it.
No, absolutely. And, again, I mean, I think we probably both have the same sorts of stories about how it's helped us to sharpen us. We both work with multiple organizations or people at the same time, right? Like we're kind of bouncing between contexts a reasonable amount, whilst also trying to, as we discussed earlier, trying to find new work whilst doing the best existing work as well. And there's a lot to do. So it obviously is a massive unlock, and I already can't really imagine not having some of the stuff now that I have now. But there is also a dark side potentially to all this stuff as well, and it's not having to spend time with the kids, obviously. But there's this dark side that could be considered, which is like it's kind of a two-parter really. That first of all, that people use it not necessarily as a thought partner to pressure test and kind of armor plate their ideas, but it's just a shortcut. Like it kind of just comes up with something that looks kind of good. Probably no one can really tell, and it'll probably be good enough, and you can just bypass judgment and just get it straight out the door because you either like think that that's good enough, or you didn't really care enough about the decision in the first place. And then the second part, which frankly might be part of the first part, is just this general kind of concept of AI slop, which we kind of touched on a bit earlier. The idea that people can just do the bare minimum, marketing copy, or bit of basic research that may or may not be true. They don't even have the tools to work out whether or not it is true because they're just moving on too quickly. And there is a risk, right? Because people are being kind of encouraged to 10x, 100x themselves, do everything faster. These tools are amazing. AGI is here already, etc. So how do you recommend that leaders keep themselves, I guess, honest and make sure that they're not just sloppifying their company decision making, and that they're actually still amplifying what they should
Yeah.
be doing?
Yeah, no, it's a really important question, and it's probably, I would say, with executives, the number one question that I'm getting at the moment, and I'll explain why. I remember when we started Nobody Studios in 2021, right? We had like a series of documents that entrepreneurs had to submit. Customer profile, go to market, business model, like, share a set of documents to sort of, describe your idea. And, people did it well and people did it not so well. But I can literally tell you to the day, in 2023, we went from people sending us like, a couple of post-it notes on the back of a deck to sending us full blown out data rooms of an idea that they had literally, and again, when you saw this for the first time, you were like, oh my God, this is a dream. We found this dream entrepreneur that really knows how to get everything they need at the right time. And you jump on a call with them and you'd ask them like 2 or 3 questions about their idea, and it would have no rigor to it. Straight away, you could tell that they had literally, I decided we're doing Uber for cats. And that was the idea. And I've all this documentation, but none of the thinking, none of the work had been done to understand how it all fits together, right? That became very obvious very quickly. And we were very specific with people. If people submitted that and showed up like that, they were sort of stricken from potentially working with us in the future. Now, last week, I was sitting on a call with a CEO of a well-known company in the UK, and he's like, I'm overwhelmed. I have more output coming at me now than ever before. People send me 12, 14, 18 page documents to review and ask for feedback on them. I get 10 or 20 of those a day. And the challenge is because it's so easy to produce now that people are moving the processing work onto other people. So that is like the biggest tax in poorly run or poorly supported companies right now, is that they are moving the feedback, they're moving the work, the processing work to somebody else. And most of it keeps filtering up to the executive team, who are already the people with the least capacity to do processing work. So for me, one of the things I've actually encouraged a lot of execs and CEOs to do is to have a slop policy. I'm not into mandates, but the one thing I am into is them saying something to the effect of, in our company, a respectful way to work with people is for you to do the work and call on their capacity to improve your work in meaningful ways. That means not generating massive documents and moving the process, like the production tax from you onto the processing tax to them. And if people do that to people in this company, we will see that almost like as a sign of disrespect of your coworker, of their time, of their capacity and energy. So there's an expectation that you don't show up with more work for someone else. You show up in some of the ways we described, where here's the work I've done. I've looked at 25 scenarios. I've looked at different options. Here's the pros. Here's the cons. I want to choose B. Here's why. What do you think, Jason? That's the way you need to show up, and that is a cultural behavior that you need to have almost a policy on, certainly a position. And for me, that's one of the things I'm certainly encouraging, because we did it in the studio because we were just getting overwhelmed with all these business ideas that had no merit or rigor in them. And execs are feeling that right now in companies where they're getting these strategy documents that are 20 pages long and say nothing, and that is a disrespect in my world to your peers to show up like that or to expect that of them. So that's sort of how I'm going at it.
No, absolutely. And that makes a lot of sense, kind of actually trying to apply some standards to this stuff and calling people out when they don't hit those standards. But another interesting point around, we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, this idea of like, well, how do you make this stuff yours as well? And how do you make it not generic? Because, if we talk about AI slop, a lot of AI slop comes from the fact that, what's pumping out is effectively just the average of what went in there, not what got trained into the model in the first place, right? So you sit there and say, hey, write me a strategy document about going into a new market, but you don't give it any context at all, and it just kind of just cranks something out because it's always going to answer. Whatever happens, it's always going to answer, and the answer is going to look kind of okay. But actually, if it's just generic, then that's probably not going to help you at all. And you talk in the book, and it's something that I'm very keen and again, somewhat passionate about, this idea that these things only work if you give them enough context. You talked about your own data points that conversations that you're putting in there, but there's also a bunch of other context out there as well around your company, your strategy, your market, your customers, your offering. How much do you feel it's important to maintain and keep up to date and manage the context that both you as an individual, maybe as a leader individually are putting in, but potentially across your organization as well, so that you have that kind of grounding in some kind of truth versus just getting some kind of generic slop kind of average
Yeah.
out of these things?
Yeah. Again, for me, the companies that are powering ahead are the companies that maintain healthy, fresh context. One of the companies that I'm on the board of is a company called .work. Actually, John Cutler, who some of the listeners
Yeah,
might
yeah.
listen to, is head of product there.
I'm sure he
And
sends you lots of very long emails.
yeah, he does. Yeah, he writes a good email, John. But one of the things that's amazing about that whole business idea, right? These guys, they've been doing this for many years. They built Agile Craft, which was bought by Atlassian to become the portfolio management tool. And, one of the things they realized is that information is everywhere in a company, but nobody ever has, and maybe they never will have this single source of truth. But there's context floating around the company in all of these tools. And we've never really been able to bring it to a place where maybe you're making a decision and somebody else in the company has made a similar decision before or is in the process of making one. Or there's a company directive from the executive team to increase retention by 10%, but most people can never ladder their work up to that. Or so these ideas now of tools that are sort of ambiently listening in the background about the work and looking at the work that's being done, the tasks people are focusing on, the documents they're creating. Right? These machines are amazing at creating knowledge graphs of your company to understand how it's actually working, how information is moving, and can you get it in the hands of the right person at the right time? Like that's the problem to solve in these moments. So to me, it's almost like our, opening example of me just capturing transcripts and uploading them into my database because that's my context, right? Um, but if you scale that thinking out to a whole corporation where all the information moving in it, like what moves fast, what moves slow, what changes frequently, what doesn't, that's invisible to most people. But to these machines, they can build knowledge graphs. They can join relationships that maybe, I can't see because I'm a individual contributor working in Brazil, but you're working on a similar project in London and, we didn't even know each other existed. Right. And like that to me is sort of the opportunity of this stuff where we've never really had that ability before. That would have been a 3-year integration project with Salesforce and, you'd have a couple of SAP consultants showing up and it would just be a nightmare. And so again, I tend to because I'm an optimist on this, you probably recognize, like I come at it from how it can help us improve and get better. And you're right. And I do appreciate you are calling out that they're just with like the old Superman, or is it Spider-Man? Is it with great power comes great responsibility?
Yeah,
And
Spider-Man, Spider-Man.
yeah, exactly. Like there are
So you'd have
people.
known that if you'd have been keeping a track of all the films you'd watched.
I don't get to watch these films anymore. It's terrible. But like that's how I tend to think about these things. And for me, that's exciting, right? Because I want us to be working on things that matter, right?
Yeah.
Interesting, like hard problems with interesting people. That's how I live my life. And that's where I want to be focusing.
Yeah, and it does kind of feel that there's that kind of reinforcing loop as well, because many of the times if I go and work with a company, I maybe, you talked about it yourself, like maybe there's no shared context or people don't know where's what. And yeah, frankly, is a part of the reason people sometimes bring me in is to try and help them work that out and start to understand like where the opportunities are, but also what the status quo is. And it's funny because if I look at, for example, some of the, there's like a bunch of different personal operating system, company operating system, kind of LLM courses and stuff out there that people can take. And I'm not going to name any because I've never taken any of them, but I've looked at some of them just to see kind of, you know, what they like. And so many of them have almost like a bunch of like whatever markdown files with like strategic context and vision and market context and stakeholder maps and everything else. And it's like, yeah, this all looks fantastic, but I don't know a single company that I've ever worked with that could fill all of those in like just on day one. Because again, as you say, it's all over the place as companies get more complicated. And there's also not just the explicit context, but there's also implied context as well, right? You sit there and say, well, actually, Dave hates Susan and therefore they don't work, all that sort of stuff that goes on within the organization as well,
Right.
because organizations are complicated organisms. But trying to kind of at least start with what you have, get the AI to tell you what you don't have and what you maybe going to need to find out, and then iterating over time kind of feels like that can just sort of reinforce itself over time, right?
But that is the method, like there is no method to suddenly magically just go off and have all this stuff like you're describing, like again, that's the world of these bloody influencers on, who are Just like, yeah, I woke up
Oh,
this
you're an influencer too, Barry. Come on.
copy my skills.md file and you're gonna have $10,000 a month in from Instagram, right? So but one other person I really want to recommend to your even to yourself as well to have her on the show is Melanie Steinbach. And she was the chief HR officer for McDonald's, Cameo, Masterclass. And one of the things she talks a lot about is this idea of a work charter, which again is this very human artifact to pair with a company because it describes the invisible, just like you did a moment ago. It's
Yeah.
like I can look at the artifact of the organizational chart, and that's nice. But like, how do I know that when I meet Barry, that if he's drinking a coffee and his right leg is twitching, that means he's probably not in a good sort of headspace. So don't tell him something that's going to frustrate him, right? Or I'm meeting Anne and she's sort of in a certain mode, like how she likes information. She's really visual. And I show up with a slide with 6-point font and I stick it up on the, like those things are so important for people to be successful that aren't in bits and bytes, And so I always try to say it's human and machine. It's you have to not give up on the instincts, the gut, but you got to pair it with the machine intelligence too, as well, and insights, because that's the best of both worlds.
No, absolutely. Well, if someone is now listening to this and thinking, well, that sounds awesome, never done any of this stuff before, maybe they're part of that 60 odd percent that we talked about earlier, and they want to just get started. Obviously, one of the things they could do is buy your book. But before they even do that, what would you recommend being kind of, there you go, there's the book on screen. I'll make sure to get that graphic up on. Yeah, didn't send me one, by the way. I had to bloody go and buy it, but there you go.
Which I'm so grateful for. That got me
Yeah,
almost, it almost paid for one sandwich. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, you can have your whatever £3 cut or whatever. Cost of living inflation these days and everything. But if they did want to start with some kind of workflow or some kind of task or step or anything else, I mean, obviously, I know that you in the book talk about like not starting with tools. You start talking about traits and tasks and then tools. So kind of examining yourself and then the things that you need to do and then the tools that you need to do them, which is fine. But like if we were just going to be super specific, kind of like one little nugget that people could take away and just experiment with and then maybe buy your book afterwards, what would that nugget be?
Yeah, no, it is though the idea of one. I would start with like one decision that you have coming up in right in front of you at the moment, and then think about how you're going to make that decision. And even before you do anything, like write it down, get a bit of paper, and say, because the thing is, most people have never really thought about how they make decisions. They have this internal algorithm that they just sort of execute against. And what's really fun about some of these tools now is that you can like write out, how do I make a decision? Right? What information do I look for? What counter arguments matter to me? What data points could be important here? Like you can write all of that out. And then you can codify that really in a system now. So you could sort of take your human algorithm, if you write it out, and then stick it into one of these tools and then sort of fill in the blank on the decision that you're going to make. Or even better, before you fill in the blanks, you could ask this LLM, how could I make my decision making process better? What am I missing? Is there something you would recommend that would make this more robust? And you'll start getting into that experience, if you will, of using this like a thinking partner, it giving you feedback and going, oh, yeah, you should look for four assumptions that you've missed here, or you have a blind spot in this area, or so you'll instantly experience how this tool can make you better. And then you can fill in the blanks with that next iteration. And then if you just get into that habit, like you won't recognize yourself in a week's time about how you go about doing your work. And that's what I try to get people started with.
And then they can buy the book.
Yeah. If they have time, it's also the audiobook just came out yesterday. So after they've listened to you and me, they're probably thinking I need to listen to more of these two guys.
Absolutely. Like,
Unfortunately,
yeah.
Jason's not on the audiobook, but you can listen to me for 3 hours instead.
I'll do the Spanish version or something instead. It'd be fine. But if people do want to come and, check out the book, catch up with you, I know you book calls, for example, as well, like you do your Tuesday calls and stuff. Where can people come and find you and, find out more, maybe have a chat?
Yeah, and firstly, like, thank you for having me on the show and asking these questions. Like, it makes such a difference when people do the work and they also, you're also sharing your expertise and you're humble enough to ask me mine. So thank you
Right.
for doing that.
Expertise in air quotes for me.
Exactly. But yeah, look, my website, barryoreilly.com, the book, artificialorganization.com. I tend to live more on LinkedIn than any other social platforms.
I'm so sorry.
I know, you can follow me there. Yeah, but again, if you do read the book, the only thing I ask is do please write a review or let me know and get in touch in what you think about it, because that's half the fun of doing these things. So yeah, thank you very much again for having me.
Well, it's always a pleasure, and hopefully the book will still, go on to future success before it gets kind of consumed by LLMs, and then people just ask the LLM about the book instead. But you've probably got a couple of months till the next training run, right? But yeah, I'll make sure to put all those links into the show notes. Hopefully you'll have a gaggle of people heading in your direction to find out more. But Barry, it's been great to chat, obviously, about leadership, AI, leadership and AI. Obviously, the ways that we can all try and be present and do things ethically and not slopify leadership in our organizations. Obviously, wish you all the best and continued success of the book. But as for now, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, man, for a great show. Appreciate it.